to The Elusive Truth with Rich and Larry. Join us today as we fall down the rabbit hole with the latest in clown world. We're going to start off with Trevor Noah. He's another late-night talk show host who spreads the narrative and manipulates the truth with his own opinions. In this clip, he is talking about why people are stupid for not taking the vaccine. Have a listen.
That's right, people. Vaccine mandates work. And if you ask me, this is a win-win situation. Yeah, because think about it. It'll help keep everybody safe, and it gets the economy moving again. And then for the people who still didn't get vaccinated, look, I don't think you're right, but if you are, your win is that we all die, and then you guys inherit the entire earth. Ha! It'll be pretty sweet for a while, until you all die of measles because you don't believe in vaccines.
Wow, his writers are so funny. Currently, he's changed his tune a little. Here's what he has to say about the mask mandates and the vaccine restrictions when they are lifted. I think someone gave him a red pill. Check it out.
Mayor Eric Adams has lifted the rule that you have to be vaccinated to attend indoor events. Okay, that's gone. But there is still a rule that you have to be vaccinated to go to your workplace. So if someone's job is at an indoor event, they can't go to work, but they can show up to work to watch their colleagues do their thing. Yeah, which is exactly what happened this weekend. Yeah, guys, I don't care, like, how COVID compliant you are. Like, this makes zero sense. Can we agree on that? Can we? What? So Kyrie can go inside, not wear a mask, even hug a teammate, but he cannot play. I don't get it. Why? Does the ball have a weak immune system? What's going on? I mean, it's crazy. Just think about it. Kyrie can't play, but he can sit in the stands, right? Like a fan. And then as a fan, what happens if he gets picked to take the half-court shot to win the car? Can he do that?
As you heard, more and more people are finally waking up and questioning what's been going on for the past 2 years. For our next clip, I have a report from the Epoch Times trying to understand what is behind this mask lifting or the reversal of the mandates for masks in most places. Quite interesting. Have a listen.
3 weeks ago, the CDC made an announcement in which they updated their framework for both monitoring as well as containing COVID-19. Here's specifically what Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who is of course the director of the CDC, here's what she said as a part of that statement, again, just 3 weeks ago. Quote, "We are in a stronger place today as a nation with more tools to protect ourselves and our communities from COVID-19, like vaccination, boosters, broader access to testing, availability of high-quality masks, accessibility to new treatments, and improved ventilation." And along that line, the CDC issued an advisory saying that most Americans throughout the entire country can stop wearing masks. And that was, of course, the announcement that most of the media outlets in this country focused on, which is, of course, understandable, especially for people who are still living in areas with mask mandates in place. That was, for them, big news. However, what received very, very little scrutiny was how the CDC actually arrived at their conclusion. Because when the CDC made their change in guidance in terms of masks, well, both COVID cases as well as COVID mortality rates were relatively high. In fact, on March 1st, which is when this announcement was made, the government data showed that there were approximately 60,000 daily new cases of COVID based on a 7-day rolling average. And for your reference, that is significantly higher than just last summer and pretty much identical to a year ago. And that's in terms of infections. But in terms of mortality, when the CDC made their announcement about masks, there were approximately 1,600 Americans who were dying every single day from COVID. That's at least according to the government's own data. And that number, 1,600 deaths per day, is also significantly higher than last summer, and it's pretty much similar to what we were seeing a year earlier. And so this then naturally leads to the next logical question. With the infection rate, as well as with the mortality rate being pretty much on par with what we were seeing last year, how could the CDC justify suddenly changing their guidance on masks? Well, here's what Dr. Rochelle Walensky told reporters during a conference call, again, just 3 short weeks ago. Quote, "With widespread population immunity, the overall risk of severe disease is now generally lower. Now, as the virus continues to circulate in our communities, we must focus our metrics beyond just cases in the community and direct our efforts towards protecting people at high risk for severe illness and preventing COVID-19 from overwhelming our hospitals and our healthcare systems." Now, that is an amazing statement, and there are 2 very important takeaways that we need to unpack from those comments. The first one is that when she said that we should, quote, "direct our efforts towards protecting people at high risk for severe illness," Well, that sounds a lot like the focused protection strategy that was advocated by the Great Barrington Declaration, which was later labeled as being essentially a fringe conspiracy theory. Now, in case you're not aware of what that actually is, the Great Barrington Declaration was essentially a letter that was written by a group of epidemiologists as well as public health scientists, which ran counter to the efforts of the government to lock down society. Now, the Great Barrington Declaration, it argued that instead of broad-based lockdowns, we should instead be focusing on the protection of vulnerable groups. And that declaration, it gained a lot of traction. In fact, hundreds of thousands of people signed it, including many notable medical doctors as well as scientists. However, as I mentioned a moment earlier, the Great Barrington Declaration, it ran directly counter to the measures which were being pushed by the government, specifically by people like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins. And so, a few months back, we were able to get our hands on some internal government emails which showed us exactly how they were treating these suggestions. Because as the government was pushing for more lockdowns, and as a group of doctors and scientists were arguing against the lockdowns, well, here's what Dr. Francis Collins wrote to Dr. Fauci. Quote, "This proposal, referring to the Great Barrington Declaration from 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary, seems to be getting a lot of attention, and even a co-signature from a Nobel Prize winner, Mike Levitt, at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway?" And it appears that Dr. Fauci was in full agreement to take down both the authors as well as their declaration. That's because he replied to Dr. Collins with a very short reply email which said this, quote, "I am pasting in below a piece from The Wired that debunks this theory." And then right below that message, you can see the article from a publication called Wired. Then Dr. Fauci's chief of staff, a man by the name of Greg Folkers, he sent Fauci a list of additional political op-eds, which likewise had the same anti-Great Barrington Declaration talking points. And then, wouldn't you know it, within a day of that first email, the first email in that thread, the one that came from Dr. Francis Collins, Google began to censor search results for Great Barrington Declaration, which could have, of course, been a coincidence, or it might have been part of that quick and devastating takedown that Dr. Collins was requesting. To this very day, we don't know. However, what we do know is that 3 weeks ago, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, she changed her official tune, and she's now suggesting that we should, quote, "direct our efforts toward protecting people at high risk for severe illness," which sounds exactly like what the fringe conspiracy theorists were saying about 2 years ago. Regardless, that was the first takeaway from her comments.
So the truth is coming out just in time for the next wave of fear. The BA2 variant, or Deltacron, is on the way. Dr. Fauci warns we are lifting the mask restrictions too soon, and we may have to put them back in place if the BA2 variant arrives and we're not still vaccinated and we don't have our boosters. We could be in for a long summer.
To many Americans, this feels like one of the better moments of the pandemic. The number of new cases, hospitalizations, and deaths are all down substantially. And just about everywhere, restrictions have been loosened and masking is optional. But the U.S. is still losing more than 1,000 people a day on average to the virus, 1,000 plus. And as cases are seen rising in Europe and other countries, some experts wonder if there will be a surge here in just a few weeks. I spoke about all of this a short time ago with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the president's chief medical advisor. Dr. Fauci, thank you very much for joining us. First question, where is the United States with regard to COVID? We know cases are rising in Europe, in China, even reports in New York City. Are we in for another wave?
Well, we can't predict definitively about that, Judy, but one thing is for sure that we're still, as a country, going in the right direction with regard to the downward trajectory of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. The caveat about that is that we generally follow the European Union, but particularly the UK, by a few weeks, usually 3 or so weeks. And if you look at what's going on, for example, in the UK, when you combine the increased transmissibility of the BA2, which is a sublineage variant of the original Omicron, together with the relaxation of some of the restrictions like mask wearing and indoor concern about making sure people are vaccinated, and then you talk about the waning of immunity, they're starting to see an increase in cases and to some extent an increase in hospitalization, even though they are not seeing an increase necessarily in severity of disease. So I would not be surprised, Judy, if in the next few weeks we do see an uptick in cases. The really important issue is that will that be manifested in an increase in severe disease that would lead to hospitalization? Because you can expect that when you open up, as we're doing with pulling back on the masking indoors, that you're going to see an increase in cases. Hopefully, that the degree of vaccination immunity and immunity associated with prior infection will protect us from getting any severity of disease of any significance. But we'll have to remain and wait and see. Remember, the CDC said that pulling back on the metrics and letting there be more openness with regard to masking, we need to be ready, if necessary, to pivot back and maybe pull in a little bit more of the masking if, in fact, we start getting a surge. But that really is unpredictable right now.
That's exactly what I want to ask you about, because if this is coming, it comes at a time when states have relaxed their rules and regulations, even at the federal level. There's been some relaxation. It just seems to be happening at the wrong time. Or is it just here we go again? We'll never see the end of this.
Well, I hope it's not going to be. I don't think it will be here we go again. We're never going to see the end. Hopefully, as we get more people vaccinated and boosted. I mean, we have a ways to go, Judy. We have, still only about 67% or so of the total population vaccinated and about 70% or so of the adults vaccinated. We only have 50% of the people who are eligible to be boosted have gotten boosted. So there are still things that we can do to mitigate what might be another blip, if not maybe a blip, then maybe even a mini surge, as we have more and more situations where we're pulling back on masking. So we want to keep going in the right direction, but there are things that we can do that can safeguard us more.
But the warnings or the admonitions to people to go get vaccinated, get boosted, we don't seem to be hearing that as much as we were. Is this a time to start sending those messages out aggressively again?
I believe so, Judy. I know that we've been talking about this for a long time, but if we want to continue this, as I call it, tiptoeing back to normality, we want to make sure that we do everything within our power to prevent the kinds of things that will set us back. I think psychologically, the country is just not ready to get set back again. But there are things that we can do to prevent that. And that's the reason why we continue to stress the importance of vaccination and boosting when you are vaccinated.
Just quickly, two other things on this. Is there something different or what is different about the BA2 variant that people should be aware of? How different is it from Omicron?
It has one very important difference and then a lot of similarities with the standard Omicron. The difference is that it has a slight to moderate transmission advantage. Namely, it is more transmissible. The thing about it that's the same, it doesn't appear to be any more severe, and it doesn't seem to evade immune responses, either induced by the vaccine or by prior infection. So the one critical difference is that increased transmissibility fitness.
And the other quick question, Dr. Fauci, is we did hear from Pfizer this week that they're looking to get emergency authorization for a second booster shot for individuals who are 65 or over. Is your thinking that that's something people should be prepared for?
I think that's certainly conceivable, much more so among the elderly than I think the general population. The most important thing that we need to do, that we always do, is look at the data. And in order for that to be authorized on an emergency basis for anyone, the FDA would have to carefully examine the data and take a look at, is the risk benefit in the favor of the benefit of doing that? But Judy, I would not be surprised that at least among some set of people, particularly the elderly, that within a reasonable period of time, can't tell exactly when, we will need to boost those people.
Dr. Fauci, I want to turn you now to this debate underway that's just come up in recent days about funding for COVID. The White House, as you know, was asking for $30 billion. It's now, I think, $22 billion. It had to come out of the big government spending bill. Now there's a frantic effort to get it passed, but it's met with oppositions. Republicans are saying, you've already spent $6 trillion on COVID. They're saying this to the administration, or that the government has. Why do you need another $22 billion? What do you say to that?
Well, we do need it, Judy. I mean, the money that has been allocated has been well spent, and we've had a lot of very important successes with that resources with regard to the vaccinations, the drugs, the tests, all the things that have actually worked well. But we are running out of money. This is not make believe. I mean, when we look at the things that we've already started that we need to complete, the talk about whether or not we'll need a boost and what kind of boost. What about the issue of pan-coronavirus vaccines that will protect us from what might be the next iteration? So this is reality. We are running out of money. And if we don't get money reasonably soon, there are things that we were hoping we would continue that we're going to have to stop. And there are things that we were hopefully able to initiate that will not be able to initiate. That's a big concern.
Well, what we're hearing from Republicans, and you know this very well, Dr. Fauci, they're saying, wait a minute, we don't know where all that $6 trillion has gone. We'd like some accounting for that. We know some of it was diverted. Some of it may not be spent. Is that a reasonable request for Congress to be making right now before they appropriate more money?
Well, I mean, accountability is always important, but there is accountability there. And that's the point that's being made, that we have accountability. But right now, we really do need the money because within a couple of months, there are going to be things that are going to have to stop. But we're all in favor of accountability. No one is going to argue about that.
The other point that some progressive Democrats were making, and this ended up being one of the reasons the COVID money had to be pulled out of the big spending bill, is they're saying, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to see this money taken from states that were going to be able to do their own version of pandemic spending. Is that something that frankly, there should have been more flexibility on?
Well, I don't think I could comment on that. There was a lot of negotiations back and forth between the governors and the Congress about, I believe it was about $15 billion that was in there that was coming out of the states. And there was back and forth about whether or not that was appropriate and what the result of that would be. But I don't think I'm in a position to comment on that.
You were in a meeting at the House, the Congress this morning. Speaker Pelosi was there. Our understanding is it's been reported that she apologized to you and others from the administration for even having to come over to Congress to ask for the money?
Well, yeah, I mean, whoever told you that's a fact. She was concerned. I mean, she is very concerned about making sure that we get what we need to continue this effort. And what she said to me and to Secretary Becerra is that she was sorry that we had to come down there to plead the case. But I mean, I was perfectly happy to do that because I was telling the truth that we do need the money. It's not made up. We do need that money.
And Americans who are listening to this, Dr. Fauci, what is at stake if this money is not appropriate, not passed, not appropriated?
Well, when you talk about the things that we are purchasing and continue to need, more vaccine doses, drugs, monoclonal antibodies, these are all things that are on contractual relationships that if you don't put the money up, you're not going to get the product. So we've done very well by having very important and successful interventions. We're going to have to stop purchasing them. Then there's the clinical trials that my group is doing from my institute, a continuation of the phase 3 trials, the beginning of trials to determine what the best boost is. Is it an Omicron-specific boost or is it an ancestral strain-specific boost? And to do a number of arms on a clinical trial so that when we do need boost, as you had mentioned a moment ago, what is the best boost to give? Those studies will stop if we don't get the money.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Good old Fox News. Can you now see how clearly this is all about the money? Florida has been open for over a year, and they're doing just fine with that Governor DeSantis. Here in Oregon, the mask mandate was lifted last week, and you should still see all the sheep walking around with masks indoor and outdoor. I'm telling you, they're all brainwashed. We will do as we're told. We will not question the authority. Dr. Fauci is now coming under scrutiny. Senator Rand Paul is leading others to now question the great Dr. Fauci. It's going crazy as expected. Have a listen.
Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins have both shown that they'll get into the mud. If you don't agree with their political opinions, they'll go after you. When a person like Dr. Fauci controls $5 billion worth of money, it's not good that we have a really petty tyrant who wants to take down the people he disagrees with.
And that is the Hot Topic Buzz. That was Senator Rand Paul on Fox last night with Jesse. He has a new amendment that would remove Dr. Fauci as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and split it into 3 positions. One position would instead become 3. As he says, it's, quote, too much power for one person to have. Steve Forbes, your reaction.
Well, I'm always allergic to having more bureaucracies, but I think Rand Paul is absolutely right. Dr. Fauci's abused his position. It shows the need for term limits. And what they did, what he and the other guy did, the head of the NIH, in terms of the Great Barrington Declaration, was absolutely horrific. They smeared those people who dared to go against the grain of what these 2 guys recommended on how to deal with COVID. And the Great Barrington people were right. Fauci's been wrong on masks and everything else. So good to Rand Paul, and hope he succeeds.
Yeah. Oh, we haven't heard from Fauci in a while, that's for sure, Dagan.
Yeah, so why is Rand Paul, the senator, giving Fauci life when we've finally gotten a break from him? Rand Paul definitely has a beef. He definitely has a beef with Fauci. They have this back and forth and, in front of the public in these hearings. I understand that. The American people, in part because of Rand Paul, we understand everything that he's done wrong on the outside and behind the scenes, as Steve was pointing out. But just why are you reviving this clown when we've got other things to worry about right now? Maybe it's still COVID, the outbreak, but I think hopefully he'll just go out to pasture on his own.
But Rand Paul wants to make sure this does not happen again.
Yeah, it'll
happen somewhere else. Sadly.
Here's Dr. Fauci at a judicial hearing. The runaround and no answers is truly amazing. This is where the circus performers do their best.
Dr. David Baltimore, a Nobel laureate, I'll quote him here. When I first saw the furin cleavage site in the viral sequence with its arginine codons, I said to my wife, it was the smoking gun for the origin of the virus. These features make a powerful challenge to the idea of a natural origin for SARS-2. And again, this is Nobel laureate Dr. David Baltimore saying this. Right. Would you agree or disagree with Dr. Baltimore?
Well, Dr. Baltimore, who is an extraordinarily accomplished scientist, has backtracked on that statement and says, I wish I had not used the word smoking gun when it was pointed out to him that this is seen in a number of coronaviruses, including one of the common cold coronaviruses. So I believe if you would ask...
So you disagree with him?
Well, I agree with his second statement where he backtracked and said he wished he had not used...
So you disagree with his first statement, though?
And he disagrees with his first statement.
Okay, he's not going to answer the question. We also have the S1 subunit, and I refer to the timeline behind me here, that there was a moratorium placed for viral gain of function in 2014. And I think you'll agree with me that the NIH funded research that led to this, an S1 spike that looks very similar, if not exactly, to what's on the COVID-19 spike.
What are you referring to, Senator? Can you please be more specific?
Yeah. So I'm talking about the S1 subunit of the current COVID-19 spike.
Yeah, what about it? I mean, are you talking about an experiment? Are you talking about a paper that was published?
So I'm talking about viral research that was done using NIH funding with the North Carolina lab, and Dr. Shi developed this S1 subunit spike that looks exactly like what we have on the current COVID-19 spike.
Yeah.
Is that not true?
No, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. Are you referring to the paper of Barrick and Shi in Nature Immunology? Is that what you're referring? I need to know specifically.
Yeah, so Dr. Barrick and Shi printed studies on this S1 unit that was basically the development of the key to the door that was specifically took the original SARS virus and made it so it would bond to the human lung cells.
No, there was no gain. If you're referring, Senator, to gain of function, by the definition.
Okay, that's not my question.
Well,
but would you agree that the spike that was developed there is what's also on the current?
Yeah, but that's irrelevant to anything until you have a context in which you're putting it. You're talking about an S1 and a spike in what context? If you're talking about a paper that was written by them.
But you agree or disagree that it's the same spike?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Senator. I'm really not sure what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Senator Casey.
Are you familiar with an Israeli study that had 2.5 million patients and found that the vaccinated group was actually 7 times more likely to get infected with COVID than the people who had gotten COVID naturally?
Senator, I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm not familiar with that study.
Well, you think you might want to be if you're going to travel the country insulting the millions of Americans, including NBA star Jonathan Isaac, who have had COVID, recovered, look at a study with 2.5 million people and say, well, you know what? It looks like my immunity is as good as a vaccine or not. And in a free country, maybe I ought to be able to make that decision. Instead, you've chosen to travel the country calling people like Jonathan Isaac and others, myself included, flat earthers. We find that very insulting, goes against the science. Are you a doctor or a medical doctor?
I've worked over 30 years on health policy.
You're not a medical doctor. Do you have a science degree? And yet you travel the country calling people flat earthers who have had COVID, looked at studies of millions of people, and made their own personal decision that their immunity they naturally acquired is sufficient. But you presume somehow to tell over 100 million Americans who have survived COVID that we have no right to determine our own medical care. You alone are on high, and you've made these decisions, a lawyer with no scientific background, no medical degree. This is an arrogance coupled with an authoritarianism that is unseemly and un-American. You, sir, are the one ignoring the science. The vast preponderance of scientific studies, dozens and dozens, show robust, long-lasting immunity after COVID infection. Even the CDC does not recommend measles vaccine if you have measles immunity. The same was true for smallpox. But you ignore history and science to shame the flat earthers, as you call them. You should be ashamed of yourself and apologize to the American people for being dishonest about naturally acquired immunity. You want more people to choose vaccination? So do I. You want to lessen vaccine hesitancy? So do I. You want to have that happen? Quit lying to people about naturally acquired immunity. Quit lording it over people, acting as if these people are deplorable and unwashed. Try persuasion instead of government cudgels. Try humility instead of arrogance. Try freedom instead of coercion. But most of all, try understanding that there's no more basic medical right than deciding what we inject into our bodies. Today, after hearing that millions of people in a study show without a doubt that there's a great deal of immunity from getting it naturally, do you want to apologize to the 100 million Americans who suffered through COVID, survived, have immunity, and yet you want to hold them down and vaccinate them? Do you want to apologize for calling those people flat earthers? Dr. Fauci, I don't expect you today to admit that you approved of NIH funding for gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but your repeated denials have worn thin, and a majority of Americans, frankly, don't believe you. Even the NIH now admits that EcoHealth Alliance did perform experiments in Wuhan that created viruses not found in nature that actually did gain in lethality. The facts are clear. The NIH did fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, despite your protestations. You can deny it all you want, but even the Chinese authors of the paper, in their paper, admit that viruses not found in nature were created, and yes, they gained in infectivity. Your persistent denials, though, are not simply a stain on your reputation, but are a clear and present danger to the country and to the world. As Professor Kevin Esfelt of MIT has written, gain-of-function research looks like a gamble that civilization can't afford to risk. And yet here we are again, with you steadfast in your denials. Why does it matter? Because gain-of-function research with laboratory-created viruses not found in nature could cause a pandemic even worse the next time. We're suffering today from one that has a mortality of approximately 1%. They're experimenting with viruses that have mortalities of between 15 and 50%. Yes, our civilization could be at risk from one of these viruses. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with known pandemic-causing viruses are incredibly risky. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with coronaviruses that have as much as 50% mortality could endanger civilization as we know it. And here you sit, unwilling to accept any responsibility for the current pandemic and unwilling to take any steps to prevent gain-of-function research from possibly unleashing an even more deadly virus. You mislead the public by saying that the published viruses could not be COVID. Well, exactly no one is alleging that. No one is alleging that the published viruses by the Chinese are COVID. What we are saying is that this was risky type of research, gain-of-function research. It was risky to share this with the Chinese, and that COVID may have been created from a not yet revealed virus. We don't anticipate the Chinese are going to reveal the virus if it came from their lab. You know that, but you continue to mislead. You continue to support NIH money going to Wuhan. You continue to say you trust the Chinese scientist. You appear to have learned nothing from this pandemic. Will you today finally take some responsibility for funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator, with all due respect, I disagree with so many of the things that you've said. First of all, gain of function is a very nebulous term. We have spent, not us, but outside bodies, a considerable amount of effort to give a more precise definition to the type of research that is of concern that might lead to a dangerous situation. You are aware of that. That is called P3CO.
We're aware that you deleted gain of function from the NIH website.
Well, I can get back to that in a moment if we have time. But let's get back to the operating framework and guide rails of which we operate under. And you have ignored them. The guidelines are very, very clear that you have to be dealing with a pathogen that clearly is shown and very likely to be highly transmissible in an uncontrollable way in humans and to have a high degree of morbidity and mortality, and that you do experiments to enhance that, hence the word EPPP, enhanced pathogens of
So when EcoHealth Alliance took the virus, SHC014, and combined it with WIV1 and caused a recombinant virus that doesn't exist in nature, and it made mice sicker, mice that had humanized cells, you're saying that that's not gain-of-function research?
According to the framework and guidelines.
So what you're doing is defining away gain-of-function. You're simply saying it doesn't exist because you changed the definition on the NIH website. This is terrible, and you're completely trying to escape the idea that we should do something about trying to prevent a pandemic from leaking from a lab. The preponderance of evidence now points towards this coming from the lab, and what you've done is change the definition on your website to try to cover your ass, basically. That's what you've done. You've changed the website to try to have a new definition that doesn't include the risky research that's going on. Until you admit that it's risky, we're not going to get anywhere. You have to admit that this research was risky. The NIH has now rebuked them. Your own agency has rebuked them. But the thing is you're still unwilling to admit that they gained in function when they say they became sicker. They gained in lethality. It's a new virus. That's not gain of function?
According to the definition that is currently operable, Senator, let's make it clear for the people who are listening. The current definition was done over a 2 to 3 year period by outside bodies, including the NSABB, 2 conferences by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on December 2014, March 2016. We commissioned external risk-benefit assessment, and then on January of 2017, the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the White House issued the current policy.
And coincidentally,
I have not changed
the definition
any
appeared
definition.
On the same day the NIH said that, yes, there was a gain of function in Wuhan, the same day the definition appeared, the new definition, to try to define away what's going on in Wuhan. Until you accept it, until you accept responsibility, we're not going to get anywhere close to trying to prevent another lab leak of this dangerous sort of experiment. You won't admit that it's dangerous, and for that lack of judgment, I think it's time that you resign.
Thank you, Senator Paul. And I would like to give the time to Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, well, there were so many things that are egregious misrepresentation here, Madam Chair, that I don't think I'd be able to refute all of them, but just a couple of them for the listeners to hear for. You have said that I am unwilling to take any responsibility for the current pandemic. I have no responsibility for the current pandemic. The current pandemic, okay? Number two, you said the overwhelming amount of evidence indicates that's a lab leak. I believe most card-carrying viral phylogenists and molecular virologists would disagree with you that is much more likely, even though we leave open all possibilities, it's much more likely that this was a natural occurrence. Third, you say we've
tested 80,000 animals and no animals have been found with COVID.
Senator Paul, the time is for.
And third, you made a statement just a moment ago that's completely incorrect, where you say we continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You approved it in August of last year.
No, your statement says, quote, I wrote it down as you were writing. You continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You were in committee a month ago and said you still trust the Chinese scientists and you still support the research over there. You said it a month ago in committee.
Paul, I have allowed Dr. Fauci to respond. You've had your time. I'm going to give him.
He's going to be dishonest. He ought to be challenged.
Senator Paul, we will allow Dr. Fauci to respond after you've given accusations like that. Dr. Fauci.
Well, I don't have any more to say except to say that, as usual, and I have a great deal of respect for this body of the Senate, and it makes me very uncomfortable to have to say something, but he is egregiously incorrect in what he says. Thank you.
History will figure that out on its own.
We will turn to Senator Hassan. Thank you.
Yes, history will tell a different story, guaranteed. Slowly but surely, we are now starting to get the correct information about this pandemic. So here we go again. Hunter Biden's laptop. Who would have ever thought that this was true and not part of some Russian interference? Holy moly, poor Joe. Have a listen. Here's Joe telling the truth, as he always does.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
The vast majority of the intelligence people have come out and said there's no basis at all.
The allegations against Joe and Hunter Biden have no basis in fact.
Who do you think is behind this?
Well, the Russians would be my number one guess.
Obviously, Russia would be the chief suspect.
This information Rudy Giuliani is peddling very well could be connected to some sort of Russian government disinformation campaign.
My, oh my, how the times have changed. Here's now the latest on the Hunter Biden laptop scandal.
There's been a big change in tune on the Hunter Biden laptop story. Remember how the media dismissed it?
Hunter Biden, this laptop that intelligence officials have warned is likely Russian disinformation.
I get pretty fired up about how this works because, look, I mean, if the New York Post tells you your mom loves you, you should check it out. We are not talking about fully reliable sources here.
It feels like a repeat from last cycle. It's the, but her emails again, and it's kind of ridiculous.
Featuring all the usual suspects. Hunter Biden, mysterious emails, Ukrainian businessmen, ...
But now, more than a year later, it turns out the laptop and at least some of its contents are in fact real. The New York Times confirming their authenticity in a report that focused on the investigation into Hunter's taxes and international business dealings. The key line coming deep into the story, of course. The Times writing, quote, emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. Plot twist! The White House is now ducking questions about its past denials.
The New York Times has authenticated emails that appear to have come from a laptop abandoned by Hunter Biden in Delaware. The president previously said that the New York Post story about this was a bunch of garbage and that it was a Russian plant. Does he stand by that assessment?
I've pointed to the Department of Justice and also to Hunter Biden's representatives. He doesn't work in the government. Again, I'd point to the Department of Justice and Hunter Biden's representatives. I'm a spokesperson for the United States. He doesn't work for the United States.
The only thing I'm feeling more than satisfaction is frustration that shouldn't this have happened a year ago, and will there still be any accountability? I don't know. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath, Emily. You'd be holding it for a very long time. But you know what, Americans, if you are not infuriated by this, you must not be paying attention. Again, it's the mainstream media and their ability to coddle those with whom they agree, those that have D's behind their names, that is so infuriating here. Listen, I don't know this for a fact, but it would seem to me that perhaps maybe the New York Times and other media outlets knew that there was some truth to this story, but maybe they just wanted to get Hunter, or they wanted to get Joe Biden in the White House, and they knew that Hunter Biden was a huge liability to that. So in the 2020 election leading up to that, they kind of just covered this. They had to shirk it off. They had to laugh it off. And now they're coming forward because they no longer have the great desire to shield Joe Biden. Now they're coming out and saying, oh, maybe there's some truth to that. The way that the media has driven this narrative should be infuriating to so many Americans. Could it have changed the 2020 election? Will we be sitting here talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, talking about inflation and gas prices if we had a President Trump? All of this we have to, of course, look back on it and wonder, but it's infuriating, and the media needs to be held accountable here, as well as Joe and Hunter Biden.
That's right, Joe. There was a cancellation by the media of the media that we now know was based on complete mistruth. And at the time, remember, even the President of the United States and the White House press secretary maintained it was Russian disinformation. Let's remind our viewers, just in case they forgot.
Known, Peter, that there was a broad range of Russian disinformation back in 2020.
You still think that the stories from the fall about your son Hunter were Russian disinformation and a smear campaign, like you said?
Yes. God love you, man. You're a one-horse pony.
Oh, boy. Well, we heard a lot about collusion, right, during the Trump era. But the real collusion happened between broadcast, print, and social media all working together to either squash or, the only word that comes to mind, piously dismiss the Hunter Biden laptop story. I'm going to give you the gold star here in terms of dismissals and piousness. NPR, their managing editor, said this, quote, "We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, and we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions." And quite frankly, that's where we ended up. This was a politically driven event, and we decided to treat it that way. Boy, that aged well, didn't it? And by the way, there were 50 former intelligence officers that signed off on a letter saying this was Russian disinformation, including John Brennan, who's now with MSNBC, and John Clapper, who is now with CNN. And if you read that letter, as I did this morning, they admit that they had no evidence that the Russians were involved, but they just had a bad feeling in the pit of their stomach and decided to throw it out there anyway. What an absolute joke, guys.
That's right. We have a full screen of those gentlemen that you just referenced, the U.S. intel officials, just to round out the trifecta of media, the executive branch, and then these guys. And I find it interesting, Lauren, Joe Concha's point that, you know, when the media says that, NPR quote, the gold star, as he said, that they said it was a distraction. But a distraction from what? From pushing the narrative of the White House? Exactly.
They want to get Biden into office, and now that he is, why did this story come out 17 months later? Are they trying to disqualify him for a potential 2024 run so they can get another Democratic country in because they're looking at the state of the country and the unpopularity ratings? Yeah. I just pose that as an open question.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a different question. How thick are the thieves of truth? Because I remember another media outlet, and let's go ahead and throw them in as a media outlet and not some just outlier of social platform, Twitter. Because remember, they want to put their thumb on the scale about what is factual and what is information and what is disinformation and what is disqualification, all of that. So I guess they think they're journalists. So let's just do the mind experiment for just a second and pretend like they're journalists. So how thick are the thieves of truth? Because if you even tweeted, retweeted, talked about tweeting the New York Post true and real story about Hunter Biden, his ties with energy, right? Oil companies, and the millions, potentially billions of dollars that were wrapped up in deals with him sitting on energy boards with no prior work experience to do so. In an admission on 60 Minutes, he said, I used my dad's name. So we know the tying together. And why do we care about all of this? If you're a journalist, you know the answer. It's nonpartisan. It is because when an American president has a conduit for bribery or vulnerability, like a son on drugs who'll do pretty much anything, Hunter Biden, and get caught doing it, that vulnerability exposes all of us as citizens. We care. We want our president not only to be successful, but to be nationally secured.
Yeah. Is he compromised?
Yeah.
Is he compromised? That's the whole issue of the story. And if what you say is true, that there was some political, or I guess it's being talked about everywhere, that, well, was this about politics because the media wanted their own candidate in there? They liked the guy, or they hated the last guy. Clearly, they hated Trump. That's just not the American way.
Yeah.
And we're the ones who are left to count on that, right? We are the real journalists. We have to be responsible in how we report on this.
Yeah.
And to give everything a look. National Public Radio. National Public Radio. What are they being distracted from if it's not the truth?
I mean, that's right. So, you guys, the president's son is being currently criminally investigated for improper lobbying, money laundering, and tax evasion. And yet the existence of the Hulk Hogan sex tape was ruled by a court to be newsworthy. And that investigation isn't. Like, we are being told by the mainstream media that it's not newsworthy, that this is a distraction from whatever they're putting forth. And it's being piled on by intel officers, by the president of the United States, and by the White House press secretary.
And censored by big tech.
Exactly. And then censored by big tech. It's absolutely ridiculous. But to your point, the bottom line is it's the American citizenry that would be that is impacted negatively. It's not just that we're watching with popcorn as someone's demise unfolds. It's that it actually affects us because we pay their salaries.
It is nice to hear the truth is starting to come out. The three-ring circus continues, and if you don't think that this Ukraine conflict has nothing to do with this, and it's still all of Putin's fault for all the supply chain issues, high fuel costs, and the store shelves being bare, we have a long way to go to get to the truth. Just keep your eyes and ears open and try to get as much information as you can, because you're still being manipulated by the media. With that, I want to wish everybody well, peace, and I hope you're doing good. I mean, we're in a crazy world right now. Larry is coming back from Arizona. He's got some top secret information that's going to blow your mind away. You thought all this was crazy. Oh, Larry's back with way more than you could ever imagine. So, take care. Keep looking for that elusive truth, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.